This story happened in 2016. At the time, I was living on my own in an apartment with my dog, finishing up college. That Christmas, my dad was only 350 miles or so away from me, 2 states away, as opposed to being over 2,000 miles away in my home state. So my mom flew in, and I drove in with my dog, so we could spend Christmas together. The trip there in the first week was great. It was my first time living away from home, so it was nice to be with my parents again. However, the day before Christmas Eve, my mom found out that my dad was having an affair. And that kind of threw a wrench into things, needless to say. They fought all day into Christmas Eve. I got fed up quick, but I had driven there, so all I had to do was go in my car and drive back home. My parents were upset when they saw me repacking my car. It was now 7 a.m. on Christmas Eve, but I didn't really care. I'd rather spend my Christmas on the road than be in the middle of this drama. There was a lot of snow, but the weather had slowed down for the past few days, so I knew that the roads would be clear, and my car had 4-wheel drive. So I set off, and spent the first hour of my road trip just angrily venting everything to my dog. I filled up my car before I left, because I knew that the drive from my dad's apartment to my college town would be exactly 1 tank of gas. So whenever I needed to refill again, it would be in a familiar area. About 2 hours in, I wanted to give my dog a bathroom break to avoid any accidents in my car. That's when I pulled in to a deserted rest stop to do just that. I hooked him up to his harness and made sure that I had my keys, phone, and my flashlight. I was cleaning up after him when I realized that he was doing these low, rumbling noises, the sound that dogs make when they see something. And he began kicking up snow with his hind legs. Now is probably a good time to inform you that I don't have a big scary dog. He's a barely 10-pound Yorkie. The Christmas sweater that my mom made for him didn't exactly help him look more intimidating. He may not be a guard dog, but he is a good motion sensor alarm. I looked up to see what he had been barking at, expecting it to be an animal, but it wasn't. There was a distinctly human figure in the distance. Had my dog not alerted me, I would have never noticed. There were not any other cars in this parking lot, and this place was fairly isolated. It was unnerving. I scooped up my dog and went back to my car. Normally when I picked him up, my dog would stop barking at whatever he sees, but that was not the case this time around. He kept squirming in my arms so he could look behind me, and was getting more and more worked up until he was almost clawing at me. When we got to my car, I finally looked back again, and this time, the figure was much closer, because he was full-on sprinting right at my car. I panicked and threw my dog into the passenger seat. I quickly got in and locked my doors. But of course, my car would not start. I had never had this problem before, but the engine was not wanting to turn over. My dog was now in the back seat scratching at the windows and was going insane, barking and growling. The man reached my car. He resembled any other homeless man I had ever seen, with layers of slightly torn jackets, some dirty jeans, with shaggy hair and a beard. He went from his sprint to a slow jog once he got into the parking lot. When he approached my car, he slammed his hands against the driver window.
"I need a ride."
He sounded out of breath, but very monotone. Sorry, no. I'm about to call a tow truck though. If you need a ride, you can get one from him." I knew that I looked and sounded scared, and the man started pounding on my window again with both fists. He said something about being cold and needing a ride into the city, and that it was Christmas Eve. But at this point I had stopped paying attention to him and was just focusing on trying to get my dog to calm down. He was still losing his mind in the back seat, still barking, growling, and scratching at the window. My dog has never before or since acted this way towards anybody. While he's not very fond of strangers or new people, he's always been the type to basically ignore strangers, or any of their attempts to get his attention. So for him to be going crazy like this was a massive red flag for me. I held onto his harness to get him to relax, and I told the man that if he was cold, he could wait in the restroom for the tow truck to arrive. He motioned for me to roll down my window, and I shook my head no. I finally just put my hands over my dog's mouth, shushing him, and told the man that I couldn't help him. He looked angry, and then tried to open my door. Thankfully, it wouldn't budge, but it made my dog squirm out of my hands and went full-on ballistic again. I pulled out my phone to dial 911, and the second he realized what I was doing, he stepped back from my car and rushed into the bathrooms. Him leaving made my dog instantly lay down and relax. I explained to the dispatch what was going on. The lady was very nice, and she sent a police officer to the rest stop and agreed to stay on the phone with me until he arrived. The man came out of the restrooms and back towards my car. I began to panic again, but when he came close enough, I assumed that he could still hear me on the phone with the dispatch, and that made him run off in the direction he had originally come from. It took 15 minutes for the officer to find me. When we talked, we agreed that it was super expensive to get a tow truck out here on Christmas Eve, so I ended up deciding to call my parents to tell them that my car had broken down. My dad had a big pickup truck and was able to borrow a trailer from his coworker. The officer allowed my dog to sit in his cruiser to warm up while he looked around and followed the man's footprints for a while, but ultimately the man had vanished. My parents arrived around 2 hours later, and the officer helped my dad load the car up onto the trailer. I didn't plan on telling my parents anything more than my car had just broken down, but the officer filled them in about what happened anyway. Both of my parents then felt awful about everything, and they decided not to fight anymore, or at least in front of me. My dad was able to fix my car, but I think the entire situation really scared both him and my mom, because they ended up trading my car in for a new one the day after Christmas. They told me to consider it a late Christmas gift and an early graduation present, and my mom insisted on driving home with me when the holidays were over and flying out of my city instead. I never received any updates from the police if they ever saw or heard from that man again. Hopefully he's learned his lesson about harassing people at rest stops.
Merry Christmas.